Guiding principles, the spirit of our traditions. Tradition 2. For our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. Whatever our views of a higher power, we can see a loving force working in a groups. Seeing the power available to us when we work together allows us to set in our own lives as well. As we work the steps, we learn to trust ourselves when we are untrustworthy. We begin to feel worthy. Recovery is as simple as it is complicated, as not lying to ourselves anymore. We can hear our own conscience. Each of us is healthier in some ways than the others. We trust and we use good sense, living in fellow living in fellowship with other addicts. We learn discernment. The person we feel safe to talk to when our heart hurts may not be the same person we would choose to be our group treasure. Trusting is an act of love. Giving that gift is the choice each of us makes for ourselves. The second tradition assures us that NA will be there for us no matter what. When we have a reservation in our second tradition, we don't quite believe that all will be well. We fear that we have the ability to destroy Narcotics Anonymous if something particular happens. If we take actions or pass that motion or even list a scary idea, NA will die. Our experience shows us that NA is strong enough to withstand our growing pains. Tradition 2 tells us that we can trust a power greater than ourselves. We learn to stand up for our principles without feeling like we are fighting for our lives. When we trust the process, we are free to participate in it. We are safe to act in unity. We speak our conscience from a place of love and hear the voice of a higher power. Tradition 2. The second tradition is clear and freeing. It begins with the group united by a common purpose, but it is immediately makes clear that neither the group nor its members are in charge. Tradition 2 sets an ultimate authority above us all, freeing us from the need to either be an authority or submit to someone else's control. Under the loving care of a power greater than ourselves, we are all equal and we are all each important to the NA as a whole. In many ways, the second tradition can be said to embody the spirit of all 12. Excuse me. Unity, purpose, selfless service, relationships to a God of our understanding. Conscious and anonymity are principles that shape the second tradition and our way of life. The better we understand this tradition, the more clearly we understand what NA has to offer and what it asks of us. Service is any action through which we give ourselves, and every service position is a stewardship of trust. We do not govern. We also do not own service positions, boards, committees, or meetings. When we come together in unity, we shine. A connected group conscious recognizes the value of all of its members. One member describes leadership in NA as holding a space for the brilliance of others. Allowing that brilliance to come together can be challenging. It requires us to listen to reserve judgment and to open to new answers even when we are really committed to the old ones. Many of us struggle to reconcile the idea of leadership put forth by this tradition with our concerns about authority and control. The most powerful way we lead in NA is by example. The basic text reminds us in step 12 that temptation to give advice is great, but when we do so, we lose the respect of the newcomers. Tradition 2 tells us that leadership in NA will never be a position of authority. When we lead, we are servants. Practicing responsibility and selflessness together opens the door for a spiritual gift of anonymity. The tradition speaks of a group conscience, and within NA there are varied understandings of what this means. Some members believe that the only place for group conscience exists in the NA groups. Others see it more broadly. Our group purpose is like our common welfare. It is one that ties and binds us together, a unifying thread that weaves through everything we do in NA. In this view, the process of coming to a decision as a service board or a committee is no less spiritual than in the groups. Each member in each group is entitled to their own understanding. Honoring group service is a spirit. Honoring group conscience is a spiritual experience. Sometimes listening to the group is easy and gratifying. When we sit in a business meeting and learn about practicing principles, we can be glad we were there. When a newer member teaches us something we hadn't quite understood before, we may be amazed at the power of the program. At the power of the program. We serve by being presented We serve by being present and meeting the needs of the group as expressed in our conscience, by its conscience. The love and unity we feel as a result are rewards for the time and energy we give in service to NA. When we disagree with a decision or direction, honoring the conscience is much more challenging. We will not always get our way, and letting go can be a struggle. The second tradition asks us to let go of our self obsessions and desire for control. Group conscience serves as a compass, guiding us through challenges we face together. There are times when we must find the courage to let the lone voice on an issue stand up for the principle against the strong majority. We choose our battles wisely. If we notice that we are the lone voice on every issue, we may want to consider the utility of the acceptance and the surrender of the spiritual principles. Listening to guidance to our own conscience, to your own conscience, to each other, and to the needs of the group for the guidance of the higher power expressed in the group conscience. One way to understand the group conscious is by the collective awareness of the spiritual principles. When each of us listen carefully to our own conscience and pays attention to each other, we develop a common voice and shared wisdom. When we listen to the higher power in our decision making, our decisions improve. When we foster awareness, it grows and becomes greater than the sum of its parts. Word by word. Define on and expand the words or phrases that comes in addition one at a time or in relation to each other for writing or discussing with your sponsor or other NA members. Example, servant. To be a servant may mean attending to others in relationships and equality, but this is not but this is not the only way to understand the term, nor is it the meaning that applies when we use the term NA or other meanings in the world includes a person who is devoted and useful and beneficial and cares for others, or works toward a purpose A servant acts with care and devotion in a role of trust. It is an authority we use the language because no other individual can have sole ownership over any parts of NA. We serve our fellowship with humility and gratitude, recognizing the importance of everyone's contributions. When we strive to serve selflessly, our purpose rather than our personality is our primary. This task, purpose, and process are all spiritual. Serving challenges us just to make an amends, teaches us to be more forgiving. Selfless service, bringing generosity, compassion, and awareness to purpose. Service is a practice for how we live in the world. Is It is an opportunity to give what has been so freely given to us and recognize how much effort goes into blessings we take for granted in and out of Narcotics Anonymous. Spiritual principles. Each each tradition embodies a variety of spiritual principles. A list of principles and values below may be useful to consider applications for this tradition. Explore them in writing and discuss them with a sponsor, other NA members. If other principles or values are not listed below seem relevant to you, include them as well. Unity, selflessness, hospitality, surrender, love, empathy, acceptance, anonymity, goodwill, commitment, safety, humility. Example, love. Love is one of the driving forces of Narcotics Anonymous, and yet tradition too is the only tradition in which the word love appears. The loving spirit that binds us together is greater than our individual personality. A spirit of love gives life to anonymity, allowing us to come together in unity. Being a trusted serving and acting in the spirit of love and a trusting a power greater than ourselves are all part of practicing this tradition. The love we share in NA means we care enough to serve each other's lives. The most loving things we do for each other aren't always easy or gentle. We try to approach each other and serve with kindness, care, and concern, and find courage to reach out to others with honesty and compassion. Regardless of who we are and where we've been and what we've done, we find Narcotics Anonymous as a place of empathy, acceptance, welcome, and belonging. We don't find it with everyone, but anonymity frees us to experience love, and that love is to turn frees us to accept one another without reservation. The second tradition tells us a loving God may express himself in our group conscious, but it is hard to hear a loving God when we are being unloving. Unity depends on our willingness to keep coming from love, even when that seems like the hardest thing to do. It is a spiritual exercise that challenges us to be spiritual and a spiritual commitment that ensures our survival. Four members. Each of us has a conscious, a quiet voice that guides us. And its roots, the word conscious means to know within oneself. Developing our personal consciousness is a process that continues as long as we are clean. Many of us begin recovery with a distorted sense of right or wrong. Our moral compass has been skewed by our addiction, and we had trouble following its guidance. Reconnecting with our conscience often begins values by taking on the values of others. Learning to see from another's point of view help builds empathy, but it also teaches teaches us to see new responsibilities. Things can look very different from another angle or vision. While our sponsor, our family, and our community all provide us with models, ultimately we must learn to know within ourselves. Through the steps, we develop our own values and tools and recognize when we are on course and when we are drifting. Often, this begins as a set of absolutes, right or wrongs, ups or downs, and that's the end of it. Gradually, we start to see shades of color where there had once been only black and white, and we mature and we are more able to tolerate mixed feelings. There can be many different right answers to the same question. Challenging our angles of vision changes what we see. Our perspective shapes our perceptions, and our perceptions helps determine our experience. When we come together to make decisions for NA, we listen together for guidance from a higher power. Learning to listen takes practice and patience. We hear our conscience, and in its ideas of fellow members, our personal recovery contributes to the conscience of the group. In meditation meetings in service, we learn that silence can allow us to hear the quiet voice of truth within. Our practice of second tradition begins among recovering addicts who share our principles, and as we serve together, a bond develops. The friendship forged in service can be some of the deepest in our lives. This time spent and trust developed in service gives us an opportunity to share deeply with one another. Intimacy develops through shared experiences, despite our differences of opinion or style. We are united by our love for Narcotics Anonymous and our shared sense of responsibility for our primary purpose. Being a trusted servant goes against everything addiction demands of us. This is one reason why being of service is such a powerful part of recovery, in much the same way of making amends teaches us to be more forgiving. The practice of being a trusted servant brings us generosity, compassion, and awareness of our purpose. We may not experience the same unity of purpose with people in other areas of our lives. Outside of NA, people are not bound by our traditions, but they have principles and values of their own. We can apply these principles of this tradition as we relate to those around us. We look for the common ground and common guidance and common purpose with others. Our relationships with the world can shift dramatically. The second tradition offers freedom from self centeredness by helping us practice being a part of rather than apart from. The simple change in perspective can offer profound improvements in our relationships. Our lives can become more harmonious and loving when we consider our group purpose at home and or at work, when we are willing to allow the ultimate authority above the situation and listen for that voice. When we approach our work families, our community organizations, and a willingness to serve and cooperate with others that govern. The same tools we use to be happy, productive members of a group can help us experience unity and a sense of belonging in other areas of our lives. One member shared about learning to practice tradition too at home. My sponsor suggested I try approaching my relationship like a coffee commitment. To show up and to do my part is a spirit of selfless service. I thought I was being asked to be submissive, but the opposite was true. I got free from the idea that a relationships were about winning or losing. When we ask, how do we be of service rather than how we can be served, it is much easier to find serenity. It wasn't easy and I wasn't consistent, the member added, but the shift meant that my actions weren't just about me or my partner anymore. It was about my relationship with a higher power as I could express it at home. Excuse me. It became a way for me to learn about love, trust, service, and developing a group conscience that would serve everyone in the household. Practicing these principles in all our affairs can bring us freedoms in all areas of our lives. Tradition 2 offers us a spirituality any of us can put into practice. Together, group conscious and consensus, conscious and conscious, brings our relationship with the higher power into our decisions, actions, and relationships at every level. Finding that bridge between tradition 2 and step 11 changes us at our core. We learn to trust and to be trustworthy, to give freely and lead humbly. NA services NA service is how we give back what we are so freely given. Together we seek our higher power's will and the power to carry that out. We know what it feels like to be in harmony with the with that conscious. All of us in the group practice how to live in the world. Questions for member. The questions below offer a way to begin or continue the process of writing, reflection, and discussion of this tradition with your sponsor or other NA members. In NA, 1. What is a conscience and how do I get in touch with mine? What does the group conscience mean to me and how do I participate in it? What is the difference between the group conscious and an individual conscious and my individual conscious? 2. How does practicing a group conscious help develop the sense of a higher power? How do I allow that higher power to influence my decision making? What helps me cultivate that influence? 3. How does my understanding of open mindedness help me apply the second tradition? How do I encourage or welcome the ideas of new members? How do I consider the needs and views of those who aren't in the room? How do I find and encourage to ask difficult questions in the business meetings? 4. How do I set aside my personal preference in favor of an emerging conscience? Nope, consensus. What is the difference between surrender and what is the difference between surrender and abdication to my responsibility? 5. Is my behavior in the group business meeting consistent with the principles of this tradition? Do I use my clean time or position in to intimidate others or to assert authority? Do I listen or do I just want to talk? How do I find the balance? 6. What part does my higher power play in the service efforts as members of a home group? How does faith allow me to carry out the group conscience even if I disagree with it? 7. What are the attributes of a trusted servant? Which of these do I act on or strive for? 8. What is the difference between governing and leadership? As a trusted servant, how am I a leader? How do I practice leadership in my home group? How do I practice leadership in the spirit of anonymity when I am most likely to try to govern? How does this tradition help me understand anonymity? How does anonymity help me understand this tradition? How do I practice anonymity in the terms of this tradition? 10. Describe any bridges between this tradition and one or more of the 12 steps. What do these bridges teach me about my recovery? 11. What more can I do to put principles in this tradition into action? How would applying this tradition change my attitude and actions in all our affairs? Number 12. How have I applied this tradition outside of NA? How else might these principles of tradition guide my thinking and my actions? 13. Are there any other areas in my life where I can see values of a conscience or where I can see a conscience emerging? How do I listen for what I know is a group conscience in my relationships outside of NA? 14. Does my history with authority influence my experience today? How does my belief in an ultimate authority change my perspective? How do I practice this tradition? 15. How do I practice this tradition when others are not bound by it? 16. Am I open to hear the truth from any source or am I distracted by prejudice? How does practicing these principles of this tradition open me to hearing others? 17. How important is it for me to be liked? Do I offer compromise to my sense of what is right in order to please others? 18. Am I worthy of trust? How do I participate? How do I practice trustworthiness today? 19. How do I remain humble and open minded when I'm sure I am right? 20. When a decision doesn't go my way, how am I come to believe that all will be well? How does my attitude reflect my acceptance? 21. In other areas of my life, might this in what area other areas of my life might this tradition be useful? What other opportunities are there for me to seek group conscience? Four groups. The NA group is at the heart of this tradition, and the tradition explains the practical spirituality in the heart of NA groups. Our groups have purpose and conscience. Their primary vehicle is for the message. Everything we do to help an addict is to get the message. Everything we do to help the addict get the message is service. Service begins when we put ourselves aside and welcome the newcomer. This simple action might be the most important thing we ever do. Our leaders are but servants we trust. Like the group, they operate under the authority of a loving God. When a group is clear on its purpose, its ultimate authority, and its message, the rest has a way of falling into place. We invite a higher power to influence our decisions. When we listen to the voice of the higher power in each other, we hear one another with an open mind. Some of us bring experience, some bring fresh perspectives. Each is necessary. The second tradition invites us to practice anonymity by separating ideas from the people who express them. We can disagree with each other's ideas without putting each other down. For many of us, this is the first time we can disagree strongly without feeling that we must leave or that we are no longer welcome. Each of us is a part of the group conscious, regardless of our personalities or our opinions. Just as an individual conscience is a matter of knowing within ourselves, group conscious is coming to know within the group. The group conscious expresses itself in unity and goodwill and a reflection of simple decisions that define the group. How are the chairs arranged? How are the refreshments? Is there a greeter at the door? Many of these decisions occur in the group business meeting, and each reflects a conscience of the group. Group conscience is not the same as a group opinion, and does not and is not the same as a vote. Each of us can be an expression of the group conscious, but the conscious is never limited to the business meetings. Our time handling ordinary business and addressing challenges, a group develops an identity and values all of its own. In group conscious, we experience unity in action. We begin to understand how unconditional love might actually work. Timing is an essential ingredient and for cultivating group conscience. Having patience for discussing and waiting until the next meeting before moving forward with a decision saves us the energy, and goodwill is lost action when hasty actions have consequences. Some ideas need to simmer. We practice humility and open mindedness by letting our higher power influence our thinking over time. We consult experienced members, remembering that despite different levels of experience, we are all equal in Narcotics Anonymous. We see the outcome of the group conscious in the atmosphere we create before the meeting begins, during and after the meeting. In our business meetings, we can't measure group conscious, but we can feel it. A strong group tends to be consistent and recognized not just in its format, but in its values. We can sense the difference between a meeting that's spiritual and a meeting that's based on one personality's on one that's personality driven. The spoken message may be the same, but the atmosphere of recovery is different. We create boards and committees so groups aren't weighed down with decisions that divert us from our primary purpose. However, groups have a responsibility. The second concept reminds us that the final authority and responsibility of the service rests within the NA groups. Groups find a balance between meetings and responsibilities and delegating appropriately. Some of the groups are more actively involved with than others, but issues sometimes arise that demand the attention of many more groups than usual. When a group has been disconnected from the local services for a while, decisions may seem surprising or even alarming. Just just as it is important for service bodies to find the time and the words to inform the groups, it is important for the groups to stay in touch with the NA services. When we ask servants at every level to invite a loving power into decision making and then act in accordance with those decisions, when we ask a member to serve, we have responsibility to them and to the group support them as best we can. Offering them help and guidance, the better we define the task or project, the easier it is to do it well. Clear guidelines and formats are most effective when they support trusted servants rather than restrict them. We count on our group's trusted servants to ensure that the meeting format is followed and pay attention to how the meeting is running. Chairing a meeting is a form of leadership. Leaderships emerge naturally in any group, but NA leadership never means that a single member or group is in command. The controlling attitude can easily drive away any newcomer. Learning to participate without trying to control can be difficult for some of us. A member suggested that when I try to be an ultimate authority of my group, I do more harm than good. Even when I have something valuable to offer, protecting the group from the power of our own personalities does not mean that we hide ourselves away. We lead by example rather than instruction or in by instruction or in imposition. Newer members gain experience when more experienced members encourage, respect, and value their input. Rather than having to compete to victory or defeat every time a decision is on the table, we create an open, accepting atmosphere in which solutions naturally arise. We feel included when we are asked to be of to s- when we ask to be of service by setting up the chairs and greeting people, sweeping floors, or arranging literature on the table. The experience can change the course of our lives. When a newcomer feels trusted and has a part to play in the life of our group, both the group and the addict have a better chance of survival. When we help to start a meeting or an NA community, we may be in a strong position of leadership if we are wise. We help those around us learn to take responsibility. When we are on the lookout for opportunities, we share the leadership among others in the growing community. If we hold on too long or too tightly, we may find our position removed from us, either because the community outgrows the need or because we sicken under the weight. Our understanding of anonymity may be clouded by a sense of importance. We start to feel resentful. We might recognize how unattractive this lack of humility can be, and we find ourselves outside looking in. We need to remember that to work together and ask for help. Listening carefully for a voice of a loving higher power expressed in our group conscience leads to healthier groups, and healthier groups are powerful. We are a force of good in the lives of addicts and in our community in the world. Group inventory questions. These questions below offer a way to begin or continue group inventory discussions focused on this tradition. 1. What is our group purpose? How do our decisions help us further our purpose? 2. How do we invite a loving higher power in our decision making process? 3. What is our shared understanding of a group conscious? Is it the same as or different from the majority vote and consensus? How does our group establish group conscience? 4. What is the relationship between anonymity and the group conscience? Why is it important that everyone be heard? Why do we invite full participation? How do newcomers contribute to the group conscience? 5. How does our group conscience moderate influence in strong personalities or people perceived to be authorities? Do we ensure that all points of view are heard before we make decisions? How do we distinguish between leadership and governing? 6. How do we balance collective individual conscience? How do we recognize when the group conscience has been reached? 7. When and how might we revisit and rethink our decisions? 8. How does our group what does our group do to ensure the group conscious meetings maintain a spiritual focus and foster goodwill? 9. What role will spiritual principles play in the decision making process of our group? When a problem arises, how do we find a solution? How does our group ask itself difficult questions and handle unresolved issues? How do we recognize when we are moving too fast or too slow when making a decision? 10. What are some of the leadership qualities we seek among trusted servants in our group? How do these qualities demonstrate our spiritual principle? How do we cultivate those qualities in one another? 11. How can we balance ration and continue continue unity? Man, that's a new word for me. Continue unity. How do we how do home group members lead even when they are not holding specific service positions? 12. When is our responsibility to our trusted servants? What is our responsibility to our trusted servants? How can the group support a trusted servant who feels isolated, overwhelmed, or underprepared? What's the right balance for our group between trust and accountability? 13. How does this tradition help us understand anonymity? How does anonymity help us understand this tradition? How do we practice anonymity in the terms of this tradition? 14. Discuss any bridges between this tradition and other traditions. What do these bridges teach us about our group? 15. What more can we do to bring principles of this tradition into our group efforts? What could we do differently to better fulfill our primary purpose? In service, groups focus on our primary purpose to carry the message to the addict who still suffers. Service beyond this group carries out some secondary purposes. Create meeting lists, gather literature into facilities, and or putting on a dance. Each of these in turn support our primary purpose. NA service is always connected in some way to our group purpose and is under the same direction. Our leaders do not govern. Service is not authority. It is the ability to serve and depends on trust of those around us. When we need to make a decision, it can be helpful to talk about spiritual principles. Spiritual principles can be a lens through which we examine ideas. Actions taking in anger, resentment, or haste tend to create a trouble down the road. Taking time to consider principles may not change this decision, but may change the way we carry it out, and that can make all the difference. There is a difference between practicing of group conscience within our fellowship. Some members believe that the key word in the phrase is group, and that the conscience described in the second tradition only exists in the NA groups as described in the group booklet. Because there's because this view holds a conscience resides in all groups, all decisions should go back to the home groups whenever possible. It requires careful planning because the simplest decisions can take months to make and excellent communication between groups and service bodies. Although boards and committees are always accountable to the groups as well as the higher power, not all groups enjoy exercising that authority on a day-to-day basis. It can distract us from our primary purpose of the group and is liable to slow service efforts. Many NA communities operate differently. The value and practices vary widely across fellowship. In other places, a broader understanding of the group conscious allows us to the understanding that what happens in service bodies is no less spiritual than what happens in NA groups. Our members ask, how could it be that an authority so powerful can be expressed only in one possible outlet? For him, the idea of a conscience was restricted to one level of service, but unnecessary limitations on the understanding of a higher power. Many of us have been part of service bodies committees and seemed to operate out of shared understanding of purpose and values that consist across the committee and across time, much like a strong home group. The experience of being a part of a committee and work group that it takes some kind of momentum can be exciting. But it is important to remember that our lines of accountability in a service, participants may feel that the conscience of a service body and its consensus and enthusiasm. But maintaining communications and inclusion to our committees is essential. When consensus inside a committee doesn't match the consensus outside the committee, disunity can result. Often the result is not open to conflict, but a simple fading of energy. It is a service. It is a service. If service is not attractive or inclusive, our efforts tend to last a while and then fizzle out. When energy and enthusiasm are fading, we can often look to the second tradition to understand why. The times we are most passionate about a particular issue in service may also be when we are most at risk of becoming closed minded or being led astray, and least likely to see those risks for ourselves. Passion for service is a gift, and there are certainly times when we do need to stand up for the principle during these moments. Staying in touch with the spirit of goodwill that guides our service is a must. We need to keep an eye on our passion and least becoming self-righteous as we keep an eye on our disagreements, least being to harbor ill will toward our fellows. Vigilance is an inside job. We ask ourselves about our sense of proportion. Does the size of our feelings match the size of the issue? The second tradition doesn't exempt us from the need sometimes to protect our program. Mentoring, supporting, and encouraging the members in their efforts to serve can simply make it easier to do the next right thing. Accountability is a two-way street. Even when our relationships to our service lacks trust, service is un- when our relationships to our services lacks trust, service is unattractive. Leadership is a group on committee or simply performing a specific task is an honor, privilege, and a form of service. We must understand and honor the limits of our role and the difference between service and government. If we confuse them, we are generally not confused for long. NA committees have a tendency to correct behavior, sometimes in pretty ungentle ways. For ourselves as well as our fellowship, it's important that we recognize the difference between getting things done and governing. When we honor the trust placed in us, leadership and service can be one and the same. Workshop questions. The questions below offer a way to begin to continue a service discussion or a workshop focused on this tradition. 1. Does the service body have a group conscience? How do we exercise a group conscience in service? Do we invite a loving higher power in our decisions? 2. What does a group conscious process look like? What would an observer notice about our decision makings in our service body? 3. How best to involve groups in our process? How does work impact other service bodies? What is the relationship between communication and tradition 2? 4. What does the service body practice spiritual? How does the service body practice spiritual principles in our work and in our meetings? How do we allow loving higher power guide our process through service efforts? 5. What are the risks of uniformity in our decision making process? How do we consider different perspectives as we make decisions? Do we ensure that the minority voices are honored? Do we consider that the views of those who cannot do or do not speak for themselves? 6. How does our understanding of anonymity help us apply the second tradition? Are the people or the ideas we are unwilling to hear? Are there people or ideas we are unwilling to hear? How do we reconcile the need to hear many viewpoints with our desire for efficiency and simplicity? 7. What is the difference between practicing patience and avoiding discussion or decision? Do we rush into decisions or discussing them until we arrive at a solution? What is the value of listening to all viewpoints? How do we service how does our service benefit or suffer from the quality of our decisions? 8. Is an involvement of service body increasing or decreasing? How might this be connected to the decisions we are making and the ways we have been making them? 9. How do we see a higher power working through us in service? Do we trust that all will be well? What are our reservations about that? How do we see a higher power working through us in service? How do we trust that all will be well? What are our reservations about that? That's number 9. Number 10, what are the differences between being a servant and being a trusted servant? How does this change our attitude and actions? 11, what does our leadership mean in Narcotics Anonymous? How does it differ from our usual meetings? 12, what is the difference between leading and governing? What can we do to ensure that our trusted servants are lead rather than control? What can we do if a member is trying to govern or dominate a group or a service body? How can we balance rotation and continuity? Continue continued unity. 13. How does this tradition help us understand anonymity? How does anonymity help us understand this tradition? How do we practice anonymity in the terms of this tradition? 13. Discuss any bridges between tradition and one of the more of the 12 concepts. What do these bridges teach us about our service efforts? What more can we do to bring 15? What more can we do to bring principles of this tradition into our service efforts? What can we do differently to better carry out our services? It is it is extraordinary for an addict to get clean. In A&A, we not only get clean but recover together in unity, carry a message, and fulfill service obligations. Tradition 2 tells us that it is possible because we are united under an ultimate authority. This tradition frees each of us from a dangerous belief that we are in charge or that some of us are more important than others. Seeing this tradition at work in our groups offers a vision of hope, and we apply tradition 2 in our service and in our lives. We begin to understand the power of grace and available to us in surrender.